Well, we're really excited to have on the pod tonight the fantastic author, Joe Posnanski. Joe, first of all, thanks for joining us tonight. You've written some of the best books about baseball, including my new favorite, The Baseball 100. I just love it. Jared got me kind of hooked onto that. There's so many great stories. I want to start with one here that just jumped out at me that I thought was fascinating that our listeners would enjoy. Robin Yount obviously made the top 100, but tell the story of his brother, Larry.
Yeah, it's crazy story. I mean, that was so much. That was such a big part of the fun for the Baseball 100. Was there were players in there that people might not know. Some Negro Leagues players they might not know. Some sort of older players they might not know. But then I wanted to be able to sort of tell a different kind of story for the players that they do know. And Robin Yount's brother was a pitcher and was he made it to the major leagues. I mean, he was a true excellent prospect and somebody who looked like he had a very bright future. And he went to the mound on his very first time that he ever had a chance to pitch in the big leagues. Went to the mound, blew out his arm warming up in before the game. And never pitched a single inning, never threw to a single batter in his entire big league career. And, which is, I think that's unique. I mean, there are stories of people getting super duper close, but that's as close as you can get without he didn't even get the Moonlight Graham, one inning or anything. He got nothing. He got nothing. And so I wanted to write about, like, again, for each player, I wanted to find sort of a motivation for them or something that really drove them. And Robin Yount was such a phenom. He was in the big leagues at 18. I mean, he was so young and what was driving him, because there were some really rough early years for him where he played a lot, but it was really struggling. At one point he considered giving up the game and becoming a professional golfer. I mean, like he had a really interesting pre-career before he became a star and an MVP and obviously been a Hall of Famer. And I think so much of that was tied in with his brother.
Yeah. There's two players I want to ask you about specifically from this book, and I absolutely loved it. I actually listened to the audiobook, got through it in maybe 2 weeks. I loved every second of it.
Amazing.
So we're all Tigers fans. First one I want to bring up is Al Kaline, who's actually Ted's favorite player. I had never known the story, and this of him. And it's not quitting, isn't the right word, but that's just what I'll use to describe of him essentially quitting in that final game. First off, what did you think of Al Kaline? Is that fair to say, or what did you make of the entire end of his career and how he kind of stepped away the way he did?
It was just an interesting way to end a career, for a guy that, and what I love about Al Kaline so much, I mean, obviously he's one of the most iconic players in baseball history and also a wonderful guy and just a incredible, I used to love going to Tiger Stadium and he'd be there. He was just always there. He'd be sitting in the stands or he would just come into the press box, and he was just a wonderful gentleman. The two things, the ending of his career where he did just walk away from the game and in sort of an, kind of a weird way, right. But also that, and this, I never knew that he was kind of a hothead when he was young, which is, you think of Al Kaline and you think of the ultimate gentleman, right? Like the ultimate example of a player who always, him and Musial and guys like that were, you just Hank Aaron, you just viewed them as like, no emotion, just essentially just steady. And that was not true for Al Kaline when he was young. He was kind of a little bit of a hothead. He had a little bit of issues with the media. And what I love about him so much is that he overcame that. Like he became the great Al Kaline. It wasn't natural necessarily for him. He was in the big leagues so young, and then he was such a big superstar right away, like instantly. Like his best year of his entire career was that rookie season, that age 19 season, which is one of the greatest, maybe the greatest age 19 season in baseball history. And then, all the injuries and all of the things that he had to endure, and having to sort of adjust who he was makes him, to me, such an iconic figure.
And then what about Ty Cobb? As a Tigers fan, when I grew up, it feels like basically he was painted as maybe the worst guy of all time. Maybe he's obviously was not a perfect person, but I
No.
found it interesting in your book. I mean, you kind of laid out his story. I mean, what a rough go he had. Mom kills his dad. Then he's a rookie on the Tigers and he's getting hazed. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, can we maybe ease it up on the hazing on this guy who just went through that?
Yeah.
What is the story with Ty Cobb? I thought that was a really interesting chapter.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite chapters to write because there is sort of this vision of Ty Cobb, and it was the way some people wrote it, that movie that came out about Cobb, that made him into a monster, like really made him a monstrous figure, and there's just so much more there. Look, he was definitely a tough guy. He was definitely a man of his time. He went through, as you mentioned, really, really a rough go as a younger player. As the whole thing with his mother and his father, the way he was hazed, he was really terribly hazed, and he was a very proud man anyway. So he was somebody who took offense to everything. So, when people were hazing him, where the crowd went after him, of course, a pretty famous story of him going after somebody in the crowd who had called him names, somebody who ended up having no hands, just a whole weird Ty Cobb story. Right. But there was a lot there. I mean, Ty Cobb was not as unpopular as people made him out to be. He had a lot of friends in the game. He was somebody who I think toward the end of his life did show some signs of bitterness, but Ty Cobb was also one of Jackie Robinson's biggest advocates when he came to the big leagues. And of course, this is a guy that well-known racist, right? Like everybody, like that's all anybody talked about with him. But it was just everything with him is just more complicated than the story is. He was not a black and white player or person. He had a lot of depth to him. He was a very smart guy. He was a great businessman, and the player of his era for sure, and one of the greatest players of all time. And I find it, one of the things I think about with him that I find very striking is that in the very first Hall of Fame vote, he was in the first class along with Babe Ruth and Walter Johnson and Christy Mathewson and Honus Wagner. In that vote, he got the most votes. He got more votes than Babe Ruth. So he couldn't have been that unpopular, I mean, and I think that his story, and it's been recast. There have been, there's a wonderful book out there called A Terrible Beauty about him that sort of clears the air. It to me airs a little bit more on the other side, where he kind of explained away everything that Cobb did. And look, Cobb was incredibly tough, and he did have some very very controversial moments in his life, but there was a real depth to him, and that was a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, I can imagine that there was a lot of stuff that you got into when writing this book that you maybe came across and thought, this isn't how the public sees things, whether it's Ty Cobb or there's probably a ton of other players that you're like, man, this isn't how the public sees things. It'd be nice if more of this came out. And one of those guys, Ted, off air, jokingly said, I was the Barry Bonds era. Part of that, Barry Bonds is my favorite player ever. Barry Bonds is my favorite player. I think he is far and away the greatest baseball player ever. And you have him as number 3 in your baseball 100. I love one way that you described his career. What was it? Absurdly astonishing statistics.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
That's just, it's an incredible way to describe his career. And so I'm one, we've talked about this on the podcast a lot, and I'm sure you've had these kind of discussions a lot around Barry Bonds or maybe the steroid era, even Pete Rose, maybe until recently. First of all, how was it writing Barry Bonds' career and trying to set aside all the other stuff and putting him rightly as number 3, but then also what are your thoughts on, should he be in the Hall of Fame? Like how does that whole thing come across? Do you separate steroid era, or he's your 3rd best player ever, he should be in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts on and a lot of things. And that Barry Bonds essay was one of my most it was one of my favorites also, because I didn't try to hide from anything. I wanted to dive in and write about everything. So if if you'll remember, I wrote 2 essays in one. I wrote, here's one way to look at Barry Bonds. Here's another way to look at Barry Bonds. Here's one way to look at Barry Bonds. And I just kind of went back and forth because he was so, he was such a titanic figure of his time. I've been a voter, Hall of Fame voter for 20 years, and I've always voted for Barry Bonds. And Roger Clemens too. I really believe that. Look, I don't. I think none of us are happy about what happened in the steroid era. None of us are happy that, but I've always felt like that the players themselves have been sort of, they've taken the entire brunt of that era. I mean, this was a time when baseball did not test. This is a time when, home runs were, as they are now, everybody was pushing more home runs. I mean, it's not like there were any teams out there like discouraging players. And I imagine that if we could get behind the scenes, I'm sure that teams were very much encouraging players to do what they had to do. Right. That's sports. So I absolutely think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I absolutely think he's one of the greatest, if not the greatest hitter who ever lived. And of course, as a young player, he was all around everything. There's a funny story when I wrote the book originally. It actually ran online as I was doing it, the Baseball 100, and when Henry Aaron is number 4, and when Henry Aaron essay came out, I got a call at home from Bud Selig. Henry Aaron was Bud Selig's favorite player. They were very close friends. And he called me up to tell me that it was the best essay he'd ever read about Henry Aaron, which was an incredibly nice thing for him to say. And I would have told that except for the second part of the story. But he was very kind and went on and on and on about how much he loved it and whatever. And then he stopped and he said, okay, well, one quick question for you. I know that you probably have Babe Ruth ahead of him. And I said, yes. And he goes, I know you probably have Willie Mays ahead of him. And I said, yes. And he said, well, who's the third guy? And I said, Barry Bonds. And that was the end of the conversation.
I was gonna say,
that was pretty much where that conversation ended. But yeah, no, I mean, look, I think what I wanted to do, because for me, the rankings were secondary. Like they were important as a driving force for the story. But I whether somebody was 77 or 68 or 53, like they're all, great. But what I really wanted was I wanted each of my top 10 to sort of represent something. So I wanted number 5 in the list is Oscar Charleston, who is a player I imagine many, many people have never even heard of, and I wanted that. I wanted him to be number 5 because I wanted it to challenge the reader. I wanted the reader to go, wait a minute, who is this? How is he number 5 on this list? How is he ahead of Ted Williams? Right? Like what's the story here? And challenge them to sort of, ask themselves, is this possible? Is this possible that this player I've never heard of who played in the Negro Leagues was the 5th or 4th or 1st or, greatest player who ever lived? And so I wanted each of those to do that. And I really wanted to do that with Bonds because to me, like I could have put Bonds higher. I absolutely could have put Bonds ahead of Ruth. I could have put him ahead of Mays. I don't think I wanted to, but I wanted to put him in a place where people would have to be challenged and say, I don't like this at all, or I think this is too low, or I think this is great. And so that was what I was thinking about.
Before these guys, sorry, Ted, because we're probably going to move off of Barry Bonds. I just wanted to say one other thing real quick, because we've got 25 other things we want to talk to you about. Sure. We don't want to talk about Barry Bonds for the next 45 minutes or whatever. But one thing I think is cool about today's day and age and, social media, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram Reels and everything, Barry Bonds has had a little bit of a resurgence. Obviously, I try to watch anything Barry Bonds, but there's a lot of content out there of him talking about hitting, him watching video back. I've seen, split screen stuff with like him and Greg Maddux, and like an Eric Gagne at bat. That's just like legendary. And that kind of stuff to me is what makes me think that putting him at number 3 on your list is so legitimate, because when you talk about players who played against him, they don't even mention anything. They say he's the best hitter I ever had to face. Any pitcher says that. Or hitters are like, I could listen to Barry Bonds talk about hitting all day, every day. So that's the kind of stuff I think, like, so I was thinking like Ty Cobb. Maybe if social media was a thing when he was around, maybe he could have, I don't know, revitalized his image a little bit or something like that, where I feel like Barry Bonds is doing that a little bit.
Well, I think there has been a resurgence. I thought he was very, very good in the Willie Mays documentary that appeared in on HBO. And then I was part of that Greg Maddux documentary where he and Greg Maddux went back and forth on what one at bat was like between them. And it was fascinating. And I think it also, not that Barry Bonds did fine in his life, right? Like Barry Bonds is one of the greatest players who ever lived. He's the home run record holder. He made, many, many, many hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, he did fine. But, at some point, your legacy does matter. And when I think about Barry Bonds and what his legacy is, sadly, it's so tied up with the steroids. But even beyond that, I don't think people appreciated how smart of a hitter he was. He wasn't just a great natural hitter. He was some of that. But, I mean, this is a guy who never swung at a bad pitch. This is a guy who had 370 one year. This is a guy who no matter how strong he got, became so good that literally nobody would pitch to him. He was intentionally walked 120 times in a season. Right. So there's never been a player like him in the game, for sure. He literally broke the game, and there's a sense at times that Shohei is like at that level, and there in some ways he is, but in other ways nobody will ever be Barry Bonds.
Joe, I'm the old guy of the podcast, and I got my love of baseball obviously from playing it as a youngster, but getting baseball cards, collecting baseball cards. Yeah. And I remember I was about 10 years old, and for Christmas, Santa brought the Fireside Book of Baseball, volumes 1, 2, and 3. Well, first of all, yours is right next to it. Those are my 4 treasured possessions right now. But like I said, at 10, when I was just becoming a baseball fan, I just treasured that book. How about you? When you were young, was there a go-to book that you still have on your shelf?
Well, as soon as you said that, I was starting to look over here because I got the Fireside Book of Baseball right over there. Awesome. I mean, I loved stories. I mean, the book that changed it for me, really changed everything for me. What I wanted to do as a writer was the Boys of Summer. That was the baseball book that just completely changed it for me. But I would gobble up everything and anything as a kid. And I didn't like to read, but I liked to read. Like reading about sports, particularly about baseball, didn't feel like reading, right? Reading was having to read, the Scarlet Letter or something in school. But reading about baseball felt completely, like playtime. Mm-hmm. And so I loved, those kinds of stories. I loved collections of I loved, as I got older, I loved reading Roger Angel's, stories about traveling around baseball. It's such a good writing sport. I mean, it really is. I've written pretty much every kind of sport around the world. My next book is about being a fan that I wrote with my friend Michael Schur, and we literally wrote about every sport we could think of. It's like 37 chapters about 33 different sports or whatever. And I love them. I love anything with a ball, anything with competition. I love, but there is something about baseball and the history of it and the pace of it and the stories. I think it's the best writing sport we've had. And there's so many good baseball books out there.
I agree.
I mean, your book is my favorite. This is a weird question. I don't really know how to ask it. I don't know how you're going to answer it, but each chapter in your book, it kind of is almost like a love letter, to the player, to the game. Like how reading your book is like how baseball should make me feel. It makes me feel like I'm watching Babe Ruth. It makes me feel like I'm watching the Sandlot, excuse me. I mean, even down to the audiobook, the narrator, Kerry High, I just shot him out. It's like he's got the voice of baseball.
He's so good. He's so good. He's so good. It's funny. My next 2 books were Why We Love Baseball and Why We Love Football, and I narrated those books. They asked me to narrate my own books. And I did what I could, but I wasn't Kerry. Kerry is just like, he's a professional and he's so good at it. Thank you for saying that. That was what I was thinking. What I wanted when I wrote the book, when I wrote Baseball 100, and this was also true when I wrote Why We Love Baseball, but particularly Baseball 100, I didn't know, like, I knew individually what I wanted to do. I knew that individually I wanted to write about all these players. I wanted to tell stories that people didn't know. I wanted it to be a love letter to the game and to those players. I didn't know how it would fit into a book, though, right? Because they were all individually written. Right. And it was only after, doing a few of them and sort of seeing it like, oh, this is a history of baseball. That's what this is. This is a history of baseball through its 100 best players, greatest players. And of course, I could have taken 20 out and put 20 other people in. So it wasn't, but what would this book be for me? It was like, what would this book be without Ichiro? What would this book be without Tony Gwynn? What would this book be without Carlton Fisk? I mean, I could have, put different players in, but it mattered to me like that, but that was the goal. I mean, the goal was very much for it to read. And the sort of nicest thing that I hear, and I've heard it, I mean, I'm very thankful. I've heard this hundreds and hundreds of times now for both Why We Love Baseball and for the Baseball 100, is I was falling out of love with baseball and I read your book and I started falling back in love with baseball. And I love that so much. That was what I wanted. That's sort of the dream as a writer, that you can get people to sort of fall in love with the game again, or for the first time, which, right. I got a letter just a couple of weeks ago from a couple who had just gotten married, and they basically were saying that it was Why We Love Baseball, that book, that sort of brought them together. Like she didn't know anything about baseball. He gave her that book. She fell in love with baseball. And, you hear stuff like that and it's just like, wow, this is it's a pretty lucky life.
Yeah. It seems like Jared has Jared, you said before the Verlander no-hitter that you were at, you weren't really a baseball fan before that, right? Verlander's no-hitter, you were?
No, I stumbled into those tickets. My buddy that was supposed to go with my best friend dropped out at the last second, so I ended up going. No, and that's like, Matt, you can go ahead, but I was just saying, I'm not a big fan of baseball. One of my buddies, passed your book to me, Justin Schlehuber. I'll give him a shout out. And I just fell in love with it. And to me, the thing that stuck out to me was I was looking at this book. I'm like, oh, this is going to be about players from the 1900s. I'm not going to care about it. Chapter 100, Ichiro. I mean, was that on purpose? Like, let's just pick the coolest guy and let's suck people in.
It was definitely on purpose. It's funny because people did ask the rank, and for those people who are really inside, a lot of the numbers are specifically geared to that player, right? So like Joe DiMaggio is number 56 because of the 56 game inning streak. Maddox is 31 because that was his number, and so there are a bunch of these kinds of things, but. When you're ranking them, you can't take it too seriously. You can't be like, this guy is 99 and this guy is 98, definitely, right. And I thought, okay, who speaks baseball? Like in our time, in our era, who is the guy that like was the most joyful baseball player of them all? And I bookended it. So, I put Ichiro at number 100 because to me he's the most joyful player of our lifetime, and I put Willie Mays at number 1, who I think is the most joyful player who ever lived. And it was like that was very much purposeful and something I thought about.
Yeah, I mean, we hear debates all the time. Who's the greatest basketball player of all time? Who's the greatest quarterback of all time? And sometimes it is a little exhausting because it's like really, what's the difference between 1 and 2? Like, right. Right. They're both really, really good. So obviously,
yeah, I've always loved that line of like, I'll tell you what, you take one and I'm happy to take the other. Right. Like, I mean, I've always thought like, okay, is it LeBron or Jordan? You know what? I'll take the guy you don't take. Like, it's fine,
Right.
But it's also fun. It's also fun. And there's no question that a big appeal, particularly for the Baseball 100. I also did Why We Love Baseball. I ranked the 50 greatest moments in baseball history in order. But I particularly people had they enjoyed the way that ranking worked, but nobody particularly cared that I ranked the Cubs winning ahead of like Bobby Thompson's home run or whatever. Like that, like that wasn't that. But for the rankings, people cared a lot. And there is not a day that goes by that I don't run into somebody who wants to know why I left this guy out, why I had this guy ranked so low, why I had this guy ranked so high, and that's part of it too, and that's a lot of fun. I mean, I think it's really fun to I think that's the best sport for this. Like, I don't think like I've written, my last book was Why We Love Football, which I loved writing, but it was very different. Like nobody in the world would argue that Sammy Baugh was a better quarterback than Tom Brady. Like they just wouldn't. Nobody even knows who Sammy Baugh is, basically. But nobody would make that argument. But people will absolutely argue with you if you don't put Babe Ruth at number one. I mean, I've heard that many times. And these are people that their grandfathers are too young to have seen Babe Ruth play. But he still matters, and that's a very baseball thing.
I got one last question with you, just because you're talking about the rankings and where things are. Why We Love Football. I read, I actually listened to your audiobook and you reading that. I thought you did a great job, by the way.
Thank you.
Up there with Gary Height. But I got one critique, and I know you get critiques probably all the time with what's on, what's not there. I know you're a Cleveland Browns fan, so I'm wondering if maybe his NFL career made you take him off. Johnny Manziel, not on the list. Was it possible? Did you think he would be?
Well, Johnny Manziel does get a mention in there when I list off all of the quarterbacks in Cleveland. There was some thought. I did have some thought about this, specifically about Johnny Manziel upsetting Alabama. Like I did have some thought about that. But there were thousands of moments that I could have done, particularly in college. Like, I wanted to split it up. I mean, it's mostly pro football, but I think there are 30 or so college moments as I remember it. And that's not a lot for a sport that has that kind of history. But that Johnny Manziel, when he upset out, I mean, that was big. That was big time. That was a big deal. He wasn't so good for the Browns, though. No, that part didn't work out that well.
I was a sixth grader watching that, so probably it hit me in my sweet spot, whereas it probably wasn't the same for others. But
I was going to say Jared's generation. I mean, I remember we all remember the Johnny Football, but the younger generation watching Johnny Football throwing touchdowns out there. I mean, I can only imagine you'd go straight to your backyard and try to do the exact same thing.
I mean, honestly, for my time, in which I did include it, was the Flutie pass. I mean, that's basically the same thing. And Flutie was the coolest, and he was this little guy running around just like Manziel, I mean, it's college football. That's what college football brings, is like this joyful energy that I think is very cool.
Yeah, I've got one more for you, and I know maybe Ted and Jared might have another one. Another book that you wrote. You wrote a book on Joe Paterno, and I got hired at ESPN in 2011, early 2011, and people ask like, what's one of the coolest projects you work on? What's the coolest game you work on? And one that always comes to mind, the night that story broke, and you remember the cameras rushed his house.
Oh yeah.
Penn State students were going to his house to show
support there,
and everything. And the camera. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, all about that. When the video came in, it's crazy to think about this, 2011, when the video came in to ESPN, I was working on SportsCenter. I had to literally subtitle it for SportsCenter because back then there wasn't AI. There was a format, but it wasn't what it is today. I had to literally subtitle Joe Paterno's words and stuff for SportsCenter. Like me and a female production assistant who was a Penn State alum, crying her eyes out because Joe Paterno, this story is breaking, trying to type out this subtitles for this insane story that is just about to take over the college football world. And we didn't even know what it was about to be, that night, what it was going to turn into. So you were there, you wrote the book on Joe Paterno, and obviously some other stuff that ended up kind of coming out afterwards. Can you then sadly he passed away, 74 days after he was fired. It was just a very, very unfortunate story. And, we don't have to get into all the other details. I'm just wondering about your experience covering the Paterno story and then the access that you had with the family and everything.
Yeah, no, it was an incredibly sad story. And is. And that book was very, very difficult, obviously, for a lot of reasons. But I'm very proud of it. I'm very proud of that book. So I went to write his life. I didn't go to write the scandal. I was living in State College. I went to write his life. His family actually wanted me to write the book. They literally pushed me to write his life story. He'd already had a couple of books written, but they didn't think that there was a book that had really captured him in all of his glory, but also in all of his humanity and everything else. And so, that was late in the season. It was November 4th, and they were in a bye week. He had just set the record for most college wins. And it was, it just blew up. I mean, obviously, it just blew up. You say it took over the college football world, took over the entire country. It was the biggest story in the country for 2 weeks, I would say. And I was in the middle of it. I didn't want to be in the middle of it, but I was. I mean, I was the guy. I was the biographer there writing about it. And it was really, really hard, because what was so hard, and what's still hard, because people all the time ask me about it, was getting to the truth. And that was all I wanted to do. My entire goal was to get to the heart and the truth. And everybody thought they knew the truth. Still do. I just have people all the time come up to me to tell me what they know. I know Joe knew this, or I know this, or I know that Joe didn't know anything, or whatever. And of course, it was a painstaking day by day of talking to everybody and spending time with Joe himself, and talking to his family, and talking to his friends, and talking to victims. I mean, talking to everybody to try to get to the heart of what the real story was. And I feel like I got it. I feel like I got the story of a man who was certainly imperfect, but also was really demonized, for a role that for being pretty human. I mean, it's, there's a reason that Jerry Sandusky got away with what he got away with, and that is that everybody looked away. It wasn't one guy; it was an entire community that looked away and was fooled, honestly, by him. It's a very, very sad story, and I'm really proud of that book. I was actually I did an interview earlier today, and was asked a great deal about it, and what I'd said was that of all the books I've written, there's a part of me that's like, I'll never be prouder of a book because of what I endured to write it. At the same time, I would never want to go back and do it again. I've wanted to have a lot more fun with my writing since then, because that was a very, very difficult thing to do. But I am proud of it. I'm very, very, very proud of that book.
Well, Joe, I'll have the last word here before we let you go. It's been a real honor to have you on here with us. Of course. I got kind of a two-parter here, and I'm going to go full disclosure here. We talked about it off air. So Jared's talking up the book, right? And it just got us intrigued. So I decided, okay, I'm going to hop on Amazon. I'm going to buy the book, not the audiobook. I like the real book.
Sure.
Come to find out, probably a year or two ago, one of my children got me your book for Christmas, and it's just been sitting on my shelf, and I didn't realize it. So
nice.
But that has nothing to do with the question I have here. Growing up, my mom's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right?
Sure.
And the 1960 World Series always just totally consumed me, with Mazeroski. The Pirates totally dominated by the Yankees in 3 games, but the Pirates somehow won the World Series. That's one of the all-time World Series in my lifetime.
Absolutely.
And then my favorite of all time is the 68 Tigers. I mean, I look at that as the actual final World Series, where they had the 2 pennant winners going against each other. The storyline with Mayo Smith, making the move to put Stanley at shortstop to allow Kaline to get into this series.
Absolutely.
Bob Gibson, the dominant pitcher in all the world, other than Denny McLain that year, who had 31. But then Mickey Lolich steps up, not only wins 3 games, but hits a home run, his only home run of his life.
Yeah.
I guess my long-winded question to ask you here is, have you thought about maybe a book of some sort on the greatest moments or teams in baseball history? That's part one of my question.
Well, Why We Love Baseball is the greatest moments in baseball history. So that is that. And there's a lot on the 1960 World Series in there, which was really, really fun to write because found much in the same way that when I wrote the Baseball 100, I wanted to find angles and different versions of stories that people didn't know because a lot of these moments, some of these moments nobody knows, right? Some of these moments, there's a story in there about a young girl, 11-year-old girl who threw 2 perfect games in Little League. There's stuff like that in there too. But like the very famous moments, like Gibson, like Clemente, like the Mazeroski home run, like the Bobby Thompson home run, Reggie's 3 homers, things like that. I wanted to be able to tell those stories in a different way. And that was really, really great fun. And that's what sort of led me to do Why We Love Football in the same way, where I really wrote about moments. I will tell you, it's not for public, big public consumption yet, but my next book coming out is called Big Fan. That's coming out May 19th. That's the book I traveled the world, but I'm already working on my next book.
Okay.
And my next book is going to be, drum roll, the 100 greatest seasons in baseball history. The 100 greatest individual seasons in baseball history, which, we'll have some, I've worked really hard at it already. So there's going to be some of the same players that are in the Baseball 100, not as many as you would think. But even them, the stories are going to be very different. Like I'm going to write very different stories about Babe Ruth's maybe 1921 season versus, the Babe Ruth story that I wrote for the Baseball 100. And it's so fun. It's so much fun to go back and find, because there are so many great stories of players who were great for 1 year. Just had 1 year where they were just incredible and it was magical and they never were able to recapture it again.
Mark Fidrich.
You will find him in the book. So, but yeah, no, it's 100% true. And so it's really fun, to try to explore different ways to tell the story of baseball. And this is going to be my third sort of in the trilogy. I'm not going to do another one after this, but this is going to be my third in this trilogy of great baseball moments and players and stories. And I feel like I'm just scratching the surface.
Well, I got the 3 volumes of the Fireside book, so I'll have the 3 volumes of yours for sure.
Absolutely.
Final question, off topic, the life and afterlife of Harry Houdini.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. How do you go from baseball and sports to that?
That was a crazy twist. I've always been a Magic fan, like casual, not I didn't know that much about it. But I was pitched on a book about Babe Ruth by a publishing house, and they were like, "We'd love for you to write a book about Babe Ruth." And I was like, I think it's been done. I just think it's been done. There've been, many, including Jane Levy recently writing a book about Babe Ruth. And I just thought, oh, that's been done. And they said, well, if you were going to write a Babe Ruth book, what would it be about? And I thought about that a lot. And I thought, well, if I ever really wanted to do a Babe Ruth book, I'd want to write about the way he inspired wonder, and still does. He was this larger than life figure who people just, he inspired wonder in everybody and everywhere and all throughout the country. And I said, but if I was going to write a book about wonder, I would write about Harry Houdini, because here's a guy who 100 years after his death we still talk about him. Everybody still knows Harry Houdini. He was just an escape artist from a poor family, just this escape artist. And yet, anytime a pitcher gets out of a jam, anytime a quarterback gets out of a sack, he's Houdini. I mean, like, this guy still matters. So I wanted to write the story about Houdini, and it would be sort of, I tried something where it's a biography. It does tell the story of Harry Houdini, but it's more about what he's inspired. That's why it's called The Life and Afterlife. So I talked to a bunch of people who still study Houdini, still love Houdini. I talked to a bunch of magicians. I talked to a bunch of different people who collect Houdini stuff. So it's sort of about a little bit about the Houdini cult in some way. And it was wonderful. It was one of my favorite ever experiences. I didn't know anybody in Magic. It felt like I was going back to the beginning, because if I'm going to write a sports book, I'll know somebody, you know, and like I've been doing this long enough. I'll connect with somebody. I'll know somebody, but I knew nobody in Magic. I didn't even know how to start. And it was very, very fun. I was just sending literal like emails to I sent an email to the casino where David Copperfield was performing, and basically just said, "Hey, I'm writing this book. I would love to talk to David Copperfield." And then he wrote back to me like immediately. I mean, it was really great fun. And I still am very close with some people that I spent time with. I literally just went on a retreat with a couple of my favorite magicians in that book. So that book it's very special to me. It was a real turn, and a lot of people didn't get it. Like there were a lot of people that were like, "I don't understand why you have this Houdini book." But I love that book. I really love it. And it's another book I'm very proud of, because I think it really is great fun.
Well, this has been fantastic. I mean, obviously, what a storyteller, what an author. We really appreciate the time, Joe. Just before you go here, tell our listeners, because we're going to have a lot of interest with this podcast for sure. What's the best spot they can catch up with you? Obviously, they can go online, order your books for sure, but just give a little plug.
Probably the best place to go is just my website, joeposnanski.com. I do a newsletter there that I write pretty much every day. It's free. I mean, there's a paid portion for it for paid readers, but I mean, it's free to join. And there's all sorts of stuff on the website. And then my new book is going to be coming out in May. It's already available for pre-order. It's called Big Fan. And I'm really excited about that one, because it is something completely different.
Looking forward to that. That's Mike Schur from The Good Life. Is that
The Good Place and The Office and Parks and Recreation? Yeah, Mike and I have been doing a podcast together for 15 years, more than 15 years, I think.
Wow.
Long time friends. It was actually his idea to travel around and write about what it means to be a fan. And we went to some of the craziest. We went to the World Darts Championship in London. We went to a bunch of different kinds of games. We tried all sorts of different stunts. It was really a blast. And we learned a lot about fandom, which I think was the whole point. You know, like, what is it? Why are we so driven by these games? Right. And it was a blast. It was truly a blast.
Well, we really appreciate the time. I promise we won't stalk you, but I might reach out to you down the road sometime. This has been fantastic.
Please do. Thanks so much for having me.